The courtroom fell silent as Admiral Voss stepped into the dock, his weathered face betraying nothing. 12 alien representatives from the Galactic Unity Council sat in judgment, their multicolored forms a stark contrast to the sterile, white chamber. The Trixan prosecutor, its crystalline body refracting the harsh lights into rainbow patterns, rose with predatory grace. The defendant stands accused of 17 counts of violation of interstellar warfare codes, the prosecutor announced, its voice like breaking glass. The orbital bombardment of civilian populations, the deployment of forbidden chemical agents, the execution of prisoners. Admiral Voss, you have brought shame upon your entire species. Voss's gray eyes swept the gallery. News feeds from across 12 star systems broadcasted his trial. Humanity's first and likely last representative in galactic affairs stood condemned. Before he'd even spoken, 3 years earlier, the war had begun with typical human arrogance, when the hegemony of worlds offered humanity protected status. As a client species, Earth's response had been swift and predictable, a middle finger transmitted on all frequencies, followed by the immediate militarization of every orbital platform. The galaxy had laughed, humans barely out of their gravity well, possessing technology centuries behind the established powers, daring to refuse the generous offer of subjugation. The hegemony's response was equally predictable, a demonstration of force to bring the upstart species to heel. They sent Admiral Zarian Kalos, the scourge of the Rim worlds, with a fleet of 300 ships to teach humanity manners. What should have been a 3-day occupation stretched into 3 years of the bloodiest warfare the galaxy had seen in millennia. Admiral Voss, the Trixan continued, its faceted head tilting like a praying mantis. You turned space warfare into an abomination. Your tactics were uncivilized. The word hung in the air like an indictment of humanity itself. The galactic definition of civilized warfare involved ritualistic fleet engagements, honor duels between commanders, and strict prohibitions against targeting non-combatants. Wars were supposed to be genteel affairs, chess matches played with starships decided by superior technology and tactics, not brutality. Humans, as it turned out, had never read that rulebook. Voss remembered the first engagement at Europa Station. Kalos had arrived with his customary arrogance, demanding surrender and expecting humanity to roll over like every other species before them. Instead, Voss had rigged the entire station with nuclear charges and turned it into the largest improvised explosive device in human history. 80,000 hegemony soldiers died in the blast. The shockwave was visible from Earth. The defendant's actions, the prosecutor pressed on, violated every principle of honorable combat. Suicide attacks, biological warfare, the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure. These are not the acts of a soldier, they are the crimes of a terrorist. The human delegation, what remained of Earth's diplomatic corps, shifted uncomfortably. Earth had sent them to observe, not to defend. Voss had specifically requested no legal representation. He would face judgment alone, as he had fought alone. In the void between worlds, a Valdorian counselor, its slug-like form glistening under the lights, raised a tentacle. Admiral Voss, do you understand the charges against you? I understand them perfectly, Voss replied, his voice steady. I also understand that we won. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The very concept seemed to offend the assembled representatives. The hegemony had lost. Yes, but at what cost? The war had consumed entire solar systems, turned asteroid belts into graveyards, and traumatized a galaxy that had known peace for 3 centuries. Victory without honor is meaningless, declared the Arcturian representative, its beak clicking with disapproval. Voss allowed himself a cold smile. Tell that to the billion humans who are still breathing because of what we did. The prosecutor's crystalline form shimmered with rage. Your species committed atrocities that my species survived. Voss cut it off. That's all that matters. As the first day of testimony began, Voss reflected on the impossible weight of command. He had been Earth's youngest admiral when the war began, promoted not for his tactical brilliance, but for his willingness to make the hard choices that others couldn't. The choices that would keep humanity alive, no matter the cost. The galaxy would judge him for those choices. History would condemn him. His own species already whispered his name, with equal parts gratitude and horror. But Earth endured, and sometimes that was victory enough. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the Tau Ceti system 3 years earlier. The courtroom watched in tense silence as Admiral Voss's testimony began. his voice carrying the weight of each decision that had led to humanity's blood-soaked survival. The hegemony's first major offensive targeted our agricultural worlds, Voss explained, his fingers dancing across the tactical display. 47 ships under Admiral Kalos, moving to starve us into submission. Standard galactic warfare. Doctrine economical, efficient, civilized. The recreation showed sleek alien vessels dropping out of hyperspace around Demeter colony, humanity's primary grain producer. 3 million colonists worked the planet's vast agricultural domes, feeding half of Earth's outer colonies. What was your response, Admiral? The Trixon prosecutor asked, its tone already accusatory. I gave them exactly what they expected, Voss replied, a traditional fleet engagement. The display shifted to show 23 human vessels emerging from behind Demeter's moon destroyers and cruisers hastily converted from cargo haulers, their hulls bristling with improvised weapon mounts. The hegemony fleet arranged itself in a classic wall of battle formation, their energy shields shimmering like soap bubbles in the void. Admiral Kalos had announced his intention to accept the human surrender after their inevitable defeat. His ships opened fire with precision beam weapons, surgical strikes designed to disable rather than destroy. The first exchange lasted 47 minutes, long enough for the galaxy's news networks to begin broadcasting what they assumed would be humanity's final military action. Your flagship was the UES Retribution, the prosecutor continued, a converted asteroid miner. Hardly a match for the hegemony's battle cruisers. No, Voss agreed, it wasn't. The hologram showed the Retribution listing heavily, its crude armor, plating peeling away under concentrated fire. 17 other human ships drifted as burning wrecks, their crews either dead or evacuating in escape pods. The battle appeared to be reaching its predictable conclusion. Then Voss had given the order. That changed everything. Execute Crimson Protocol. His voice echoed from the tactical recording. All ships, execute Crimson Protocol. The prosecutor paused the display, explained Crimson Protocol to the court. Voss's expression remained impassive. The hegemony had a strict policy regarding prisoners of war. Captured crews were treated well, repatriated after conflicts ended. They expected the same courtesy in return. He paused. We had different ideas about warfare. The hologram resumed. The remaining human ships, instead of surrendering, began ramming maneuvers. Not the desperate charges of a defeated fleet, but coordinated suicide attacks. Each vessel had been rigged with antimatter charges, turning them into guided missiles with enough destructive power to crack a moon. The first impact vaporized the hegemony flagship Eternal Vigilance. The second took out 3 destroyers in a chain reaction that lit up the system. Within minutes, humanity's defeated fleet had eliminated half of Kalos's force through sheer suicidal aggression. Monstrous, whispered the Valdorian counselor. No species would sacrifice their own people so callously, wouldn't they? Voss asked quietly. The Zephyrian Wars saw entire populations choose death over slavery. The crystalline hive once detonated their own homeworld rather than let it fall to invaders. Every species has its breaking point, but the real shock came next, as the hegemony survivors tried to regroup. Escape pods from the destroyed human ships began exploding in brilliant flashes. Each pod contained not evacuating crew, but automated drones programmed to home in on enemy vessels and detonate. You weaponized distress calls, the prosecutor accused. You turned the fundamental rules of space rescue against your enemies. I turned their expectations against them, Voss corrected. They assumed we would follow their rules. They were wrong. Admiral Kalos, broadcasting from his remaining ships, had been apoplectic with rage. You animals, you violated every code of civilized warfare. Voss's response, recorded for posterity, became the phrase that defined humanity's approach to the war. We didn't sign your codes. The massacre, for that's what the galactic press called it, had eliminated the hegemony's expeditionary force. Of 47 ships, only 12 escaped, their crews traumatized by an enemy that fought like cornered animals instead of civilized beings. The consequences were immediate. Voss continued his testimony. The hegemony declared us rogue combatants and authorized unrestricted warfare. They began targeting civilian installations. Because of your actions, the prosecutor pressed. Your violations of accepted combat doctrine escalated the conflict. Voss turned to face the alien tribunal, his eyes hard as vacuum-chilled steel. My actions saved 3 million civilians on Demeter colony. Kalos's next move would have been orbital bombardment to force surrender. Instead, He retreated to report that humanity wasn't going to roll over like a trained pet. The prosecutor's crystalline form flickered with barely contained fury. You set the precedent for the atrocities that followed. No, Voss replied, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. I set the precedent for survival. Everything that came after was the galaxy learning that humans don't fight wars, we fight extinctions. The display faded, leaving the courtroom. In uncomfortable silence, the first battle had been humanity's introduction to galactic warfare, and they had announced themselves with blood and fire. The prosecutor began loading the next testimony file, its movements sharp with anger. The battle of Demeter had been just the beginning. What followed would test the galaxy's definition of civilization itself. The holographic display materialized again, this time showing the Kepler 440 to system 6 months after Demeter. The assembled tribunal watched in growing horror as Admiral Voss's testimony continued, each revelation painting humanity's methods in increasingly dark shades. After Demeter, the hegemony changed tactics, Voss explained, his voice steady despite the weight of memory. Admiral Kalos received reinforcements, 200 ships. His new orders were simple: demonstrate to the galaxy that rebellion against the hegemony was futile. The display showed the industrial world of New Pittsburgh, its orbital factories producing the weapons and equipment that kept humanity's war machine functioning. 300,000 workers lived on the planet's surface and in its orbital installations. Kalos implemented the hegemony's graduated response protocol. The Trixon prosecutor interjected, its crystalline voice carrying satisfaction. A civilized approach to forcing surrender, targeted strikes against military installations, followed by demands for capitulation. Civilized, Voss repeated, the word tasting bitter. They bombed our defense platforms first. Clean, precise strikes. That eliminated our ability to resist. Then they sent surrender terms. The recording showed the aftermath of the initial bombardment, twisted metal and burning atmosphere marking where humanity's orbital defenses had stood. The hegemony fleet held position, weapons trained on the planet below, while Admiral Kalos broadcast his ultimatum: surrender your industrial facilities intact. Kalos's recorded voice echoed through the courtroom, and your civilian population will remain unharmed. You have 12 hours to comply. What was your response? The prosecutor asked, though its tone suggested it already knew. I told him that New Pittsburgh had suffered a catastrophic industrial accident. Voss replied, reactor containment failure, complete evacuation in progress. The display shifted to show massive explosions erupting across New Pittsburgh's surface. The planet's fusion reactors were detonating in sequence, taking the orbital factories with them. From space, the world looked like a string of firecrackers going off in the darkness. You destroyed your own infrastructure, the Valdorian counselor observed, its slug-like form recoiling. Rather than allow capture, you made the planet worthless. I made it worthless to them, Voss corrected. Scorched Earth isn't a human invention, it's a human perfection. But the real horror was yet to come. As the hegemony fleet moved in to investigate the industrial accident, they discovered that the reactor failures had been anything but accidental. Each explosion had been precisely timed and positioned to create maximum radiation scatter. The planet was now uninhabitable for the next 3 centuries. The workers. The prosecutor pressed. 300,000 civilians. Did you evacuate them? Voss was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every impossible decision that command demanded. 97% were evacuated through the mining tunnels and transport craft. The remaining 3%. He paused. The remaining 3% volunteered to stay behind and ensure the reactors achieved critical mass. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. The concept of civilians volunteering for certain death was alien to most species' understanding of warfare. 9,000 people. The prosecutor's voice rose to a crystalline shriek. You sacrificed 9,000 of your own citizens. They weren't sacrificed. Voss shot back, his composure finally cracking. They chose, every single one of them, chose to stay behind because they understood what defeat meant, not just for them, but for every human in the galaxy. The display showed the final moments of New Pittsburgh's transformation into a radioactive tomb. The volunteers had remained at their posts until the end, ensuring that each reactor achieved precisely the right cascade failure to maximize contamination. Their final transmission, broadcast on all frequencies, contained a simple message: Earth remembers. Admiral Kalos's response had been swift and predictable. Unable to salvage anything from New Pittsburgh, he ordered the planet's orbital bombardment not to capture infrastructure, but to make an example. The hegemony fleet spent 6 hours systematically glassing every square kilometer of the planet's surface. But the radioactive fallout made the bombardment largely symbolic. Voss continued. Kalos's fleet suffered contamination from the planetary debris field. 12 ships required extensive decontamination, and their crews developed radiation sickness that persisted for months. You turned your own world into a weapon. The Arcturian representative clicked his beak in disgust. What kind of species does such a thing? A species that refuses to die quietly, Voss replied. The hegemony learned something important at New Pittsburgh. Conquering human worlds wasn't enough. They had to be prepared to rule graveyards. The psychological impact had been immediate and profound. Hegemony recruitment dropped by 30% as species across the galaxy realized that fighting humans meant facing enemies who would burn everything rather than surrender. Admiral Kalos himself reportedly suffered what human psychologists would have called a nervous breakdown, requiring replacement by Admiral Zirian Malvorth, the commander. Known for his ruthless efficiency, the escalation continued. The prosecutor pressed on, loading new files. Your response to the hegemony's changed tactics was even more extreme. Their changed tactics required extreme responses, Voss agreed. Malvorth wasn't interested in capturing territory. He wanted to erase humanity from existence. The display shifted to show intelligence reports from across human space. Hegemony forces had abandoned their previous strategy of targeted military strikes. Instead, they began systematic extermination protocols. Civilian populations murdered outright. Human colonies reduced to ash and bone. So you adapted, the prosecutor continued. You became what you needed to become. Voss nodded slowly. We became the monster under the galaxy's bed. The thing that civilized species told themselves couldn't exist. He turned to face the tribunal. And we became very, very good at it. The courtroom fell silent as the implications settled. New Pittsburgh had been the moment when humanity's war shifted from resistance to something far darker. It had been the first time an entire world chose to die rather than surrender. But it wouldn't be the last. The prosecutor began loading the next set of testimony files, its movements sharp with anticipation. The galaxy was about to learn exactly how far humans would go when extinction was the alternative. The holographic display flickered, showing the Proxima Centauri system 8 months into the war. Admiral Voss's testimony had grown quieter, more deliberate, as if each word carried the weight of the dead. Admiral Malvorth was different from Kalos. Voss began, his weathered face impassive. Kalos still believed in civilized warfare, even after Demeter and New Pittsburgh. Malvorth understood that fighting humans required abandoning civilization entirely. The display showed intelligence footage of hegemony forces systematically exterminating the agricultural world of Haven's Rest. No demands for surrender, no attempts at conquest, just methodical genocide. 300,000 farmers and their families were slaughtered in a matter of hours. Their bodies left to rot in the fields they had tended. The benthic slaughter. The Trixon prosecutor noted, its crystalline voice carrying satisfaction. The first time a hegemony commander adopted truly human tactics. The first time, Voss corrected, that the galaxy saw what they had unleashed. The tribunal watched as the display shifted to show Voss's response. Where previous human tactics had been desperate improvisations, this was something else entirely cold, calculated, and utterly ruthless. Operation Gorgon. Voss announced, our tactical shift. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Human intelligence had identified the hegemony's primary military academy on Serenius Prime, a world that trained officers for 12 different species. 10,000 cadets, the future leadership of the galaxy's most powerful military force. All concentrated in one location. You couldn't reach Serenius Prime with conventional forces. The Valdorian counselor observed, its slug form glistening. With nervous secretions, the system was too heavily defended. Conventional forces, yes. Voss agreed. But we didn't use conventional forces. The display showed the cargo vessel Peaceful Endeavor, one of hundreds of merchant ships that supplied the Outer Rim worlds. Its manifest listed agricultural equipment bound for the frontier colonies. Its crew consisted of Captain Helena Vasquez and 5 volunteers, all veterans of the colony wars. A single transport vessel. The prosecutor's voice carried disbelief. Against an entire star system, against an idea. Voss replied, the idea that humans would follow the rules. The peaceful Endeavour had arrived at Sirenius Prime on schedule, its papers in order, its cargo hold seemingly full of farming equipment. The hegemony customs inspectors found exactly what the manifest promised: hydroponic systems, atmospheric processors, and soil cultivation units. What they didn't find were the modifications Vasquez and her crew had made. During their 3-week journey, each piece of equipment had been carefully altered, embedded with components that wouldn't show up on standard scans. The cargo was clean. Voss continued, perfectly legitimate farming equipment. The delivery proceeded without incident. The equipment was distributed across Sirenius Prime, according to standard procedure: agricultural supplies to the farming communities that supported the academy, atmospheric processors to the urban centers, hydroponic systems to the orbital stations. 48 hours after delivery, Captain Vasquez transmitted a single code phrase on all frequencies. Voss's voice remained steady. Harvest time. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Every piece of equipment simultaneously released its hidden payload, a bioengineered pathogen, specifically designed to target the neurological systems of the 12 species that comprised the hegemony's officer corps. Biological warfare. The Arcturian representatives clicked rapidly. Banned by every civilized species for 3 millennia. We didn't sign those bans either. Voss replied, the pathogen was elegantly designed, non-lethal, but permanently debilitating. It attacked the brain's higher cognitive functions while leaving basic motor skills intact. Within hours, 10,000 future military officers were reduced to the mental capacity of children, their brilliant tactical minds forever silenced. But the true horror was the pathogen's secondary effect. It was contagious for exactly 72 hours before becoming inert, just long enough to spread through the Academy's population and into the surrounding communities. The casualty reports, the prosecutor demanded. How many were affected? On Sirenius Prime, approximately 2.3 million, Voss stated matter-of-factly. The pathogen spread through 12 major population centers before burning out. The numbers were staggering. An entire generation of military leadership, plus their families, their communities, their entire support structure, all reduced to empty shells that could barely remember their own names. Captain Vasquez and her crew, the Valdorian counselor, asked. They knew the pathogen would affect humans as well, Voss replied. They had 72 hours to complete their mission and transmit confirmation. They chose to remain on planet to ensure maximum distribution. The display showed the final transmission. From the peaceful Endeavour, Captain Vasquez, her mind already beginning to deteriorate, sat in her ship's command chair and delivered humanity's message to the galaxy. This is Captain Helena Vasquez of the Terran Defense Force. Our cargo has been delivered successfully. Tell the hegemony that we are not their cattle. Tell the galaxy that humans do not kneel. Tell them all that we chose this. The transmission ended as Vasquez slumped forward, her brilliant tactical mind joining the millions of others silenced by humanity's desperation. The hegemony's response was predictable. Voss continued. They declared humanity a biological hazard and authorized the use of weapons they have banned for millennia. Because of your atrocity, the prosecutor pressed, your violation of every principle of civilized warfare. Voss turned to face the tribunal, his eyes reflecting the weight of every impossible choice. Because we proved that civilization is a luxury species can't afford when extinction is the alternative. The psychological impact of Sirenius Prime had been immediate and profound. The hegemony's military academies across the galaxy were shuttered. Recruitment dropped to critical levels, as entire species reconsidered the wisdom of fighting an enemy that would poison their children's minds rather than accept defeat. But Admiral Malvor's response was swift and merciless. If humanity wanted to abandon the rules of warfare, he would show them what that truly meant. The display began loading new files as the prosecutor prepared the next phase of testimony. The galaxy was about to learn that humans weren't the only species capable of monstrosity. When pushed beyond their breaking point, the holographic display expanded to show the Sol system 14 months into the war, its familiar planets now bristling with defensive installations. Admiral Voss's voice carried the weight of impending doom as he described humanity's darkest hour. Malvor's retaliation for Sirenius Prime was absolute. Voss began. Operation Final Solution, the complete eradication of human space. No prisoners, no negotiations, no mercy. The display showed the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. 800 ships from 12 different species, carrying weapons that violated treaties dating back millennia. At their head was the hegemony's flagship Eternal Judgment, a dreadnought the size of a small moon. He brought everything, Voss continued, planet crackers, star killers, biological weapons, and reality bombs. Malvorth wasn't planning to conquer Earth, he was planning to erase it from existence. The tribunal watched in growing horror as the scope of the approaching armada became clear. This wasn't a military operation, it was genocide on a scale that defied comprehension. Your defensive preparations? The Trixon prosecutor asked, though its tone suggested it already knew the answer. Inadequate, Voss stated simply. We had 200 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels. Our orbital defenses were impressive by human stand, ARDS, but compared to what Malvorth was bringing. He shrugged. We might as well have been throwing rocks. The display shifted to show Earth's frantic preparations. The entire planet had been transformed into a fortress. Every orbital platform weaponized, every asteroid mined and rigged with explosives, every civilian transport converted into a missile carrier. But it wasn't enough, and everyone knew it. The first wave hit the outer system defenses at 0347 Terran Standard Time. Voss continued. Pluto's defense grid lasted 11 minutes. The battle began with textbook hegemony tactics, long-range bombardment from their larger vessels while smaller ships swept in to eliminate point defenses. The human response was equally predictable: desperate charges and suicide attacks. That traded one human ship for every 2 enemy vessels destroyed. But Admiral Malvorth had learned from previous encounters. His fleet formation was specifically designed to minimize the effectiveness of ramming attacks, with overlapping defensive fields and automated point defense systems that could vaporize incoming missiles before they reached their targets. The outer defense grid was overrun in 4 hours, Voss testified. Neptune's orbital fortresses held for another 6 by the time they reached Jupiter. We had lost 60% of our fleet. The display showed the systematic destruction of humanity's defenses. Each position fought with desperate courage, buying time with blood. But the mathematics were inexorable. For every hegemony ship destroyed, 3 human vessels were vaporized. Jupiter was where we made our stand, Voss continued. The gas giant's gravity well and its moon system provided natural defensive positions. We had fortified every major satellite, turned the entire Jovian system into a killing field. The Battle of Jupiter lasted 18 hours and redefined the concept of slaughter. The hegemony fleet, now reduced to 600 ships, hammered the human defenses with weapons that could crack moons. The humans responded with every dirty trick. In their increasingly extensive playbook, Europa Base had been converted into a fortress, Voss explained as the display showed the moon's surface erupting in defensive fire. The base held for 4 hours before the hegemony brought up their planet crackers, the weapons, designed to shatter entire worlds, reduced Europa to an expanding cloud of radioactive debris in seconds. Ganymede fell next, Voss continued, his voice emotionless. Then Io, then Callisto. Each base fought until the end, broadcasting defiance on all frequencies even as they died. The display showed the final moments of Callisto Base. Commander Sarah Petrov, the base's commanding officer, stood in her command center as the walls collapsed around her. Her final transmission became one of the war's most famous recordings. This is Callisto Base to all ships. They're breaking through the main defenses. We have maybe 10 minutes before the end. A pause as explosions shook the transmission. Tell Earth we held as long as we could. Tell them we made it count. The base's self-destruct sequence took out 3 hegemony cruisers and damaged a dozen others. But it was a Pyrrhic victory at best. The Jovian system cost Malvorth 80 ships, Voss testified. It cost us everything we had left. By the time the hegemony fleet reached the inner system, humanity's organized resistance had been shattered. Less than 30 human ships remained operational, most of them too damaged to fight effectively. Mars was evacuated, Voss continued. The entire planet's population, 40 million civilians, relocated to Earth. We weren't going to make Malvorth fight for empty worlds. The display showed the final phase of the battle as the hegemony fleet approached Earth itself. The planet bristled with every weapon humanity could devise. But after witnessing the systematic destruction of the outer defenses, everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. Malvorth offered terms. Voss said quietly, complete surrender. Humanity would be relocated to reservation worlds under hegemony supervision. Our military would be disbanded, our technology restricted. We would exist at the galaxy's sufferance. A generous offer. The prosecutor noted, considering the atrocities your species had committed. Generous, Voss agreed, and completely unacceptable. The display showed Earth's response broadcast simultaneously on every frequency in human space. It wasn't a formal rejection from the government or military command. Instead, it was a simple message from a child. 8-year-old Marcus Chen sat in a bomb shelter beneath New Geneva. His face streaked with tears, but his voice steady. We're not giving up. We're never giving up. This is our home. Within minutes, similar messages flooded the airwaves. Children, parents, grandparents, soldiers, and civilians all delivering the same defiant response to Malvor's ultimatum. The galaxy expected Earth to surrender, Voss testified. After witnessing our defeats at Jupiter and Mars, they assumed we would accept the inevitable. Instead, humanity chose to make its final stand in the shadow of its homeworld, prepared to turn the Sol system into a graveyard that would be remembered until the stars themselves burned out. The prosecutor began loading the final battle files, its crystalline form shimmering with anticipation. The galaxy was about to witness what happened when an entire species chose death over surrender. The holographic display focused on Earth's moon, now bristling with weapons that had never appeared in any military manual. Admiral Voss's testimony carried the weight of humanity's final gambit. As he described the last 12 hours before extinction, Luna Base had been transformed into something unprecedented. Voss began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was describing, not just a military installation, but a monument to human desperation. The display showed the moon's surface carved with massive tunnels and caverns, each one housing weapons that violated the fundamental laws of physics. Scientists from across Earth had worked in shifts for months, creating devices that pushed the boundaries of what was theoretically possible. The Prometheus array, Voss continued, our final answer to the hegemony's overwhelming superiority. The tribunal watched in growing horror as the technical specifications appeared on screen. The array consisted of 12 gravitational manipulation devices, each one capable of creating localized space-time distortions. The weapons had been designed by Dr. Maria Santos, humanity's foremost theoretical physicist. In the final weeks before Malvor's arrival, gravity weapons, the Valdorian Councillor observed, its slug-like form recoiling. Banned by the Epsilon Accords for 8 centuries, we didn't sign those either, Voss replied. Dr. Santos calculated that 12 synchronized gravitational pulses could create a cascade effect within Sol's gravity well. The results would be significant. The display shifted to show Admiral Malvor's final approach to Earth. His remaining fleet, over 500 ships, had taken defensive formations around the planet, preparing for the systematic bombardment that would end humanity's resistance forever. Malvorth broadcast his final ultimatum at 0800 Terran Standard. Voss continued, complete planetary surrender within 1 hour, or he would begin glassing Earth's major population centers. The response came not from Earth's government, but from Luna Base itself. Dr. Santos appeared on screen, her hair disheveled from weeks of sleepless work, her eyes burning with scientific fervor and desperate hope. Admiral Malvorth, she said, her voice carrying across the void, you've spent this entire war trying to teach humanity its place in the galaxy. Allow us to return the favor. The Prometheus array activated at 0847 Terran Standard. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. 12 gravitational pulses, perfectly synchronized, struck the hegemony fleet simultaneously. Ships that had withstood humanity's best weapons for over a year were torn apart by forces that could reshape reality itself. The first pulse disabled their inertial dampeners, Voss explained as the display showed hegemony vessels spinning wildly out of control. The second pulse created localized black holes that lasted exactly 3.7 seconds, long enough to consume anything within a 1,000-kilometer radius. Malvor's flagship, the mighty Eternal Judgment, was caught in the third pulse. The gravitational distortion stretched the massive vessel like taffy. Before compressing it into a sphere the size of a basketball, the implosion created a light show visible from Mars. Beautiful, Dr. Santos had whispered as she watched her life's work unfold. Absolutely beautiful. But the Prometheus array was more than just a weapon. It was humanity's final act of defiance made manifest. Each gravitational pulse was precisely calculated not just to destroy the hegemony fleet, but to send a message that would echo across the galaxy for millennia. The cascade effect, Voss continued, his voice carrying grim satisfaction. was Dr. Sanos' masterpiece. The display showed the pulses spreading outward from Luna base, creating ripples in space-time that propagated through the Sol system at the speed of light. Every hegemony installation, every monitoring station, every intelligence outpost within 100 light-years felt the effects. The gravitational waves carried a message, Voss explained. Encoded in the pulse patterns was humanity's declaration to the galaxy: we exist, we resist, we endure. The message was impossible to ignore or suppress. Every civilization with gravitational sensors, which meant every advanced species in the galaxy, received humanity's final transmission simultaneously. The technical impossibility of the delivery method made the message itself undeniable. 12 billion people, the transmission began, chose to stand rather than kneel. Remember that when you decide whether to follow the hegemony's example, the psychological impact was immediate and profound. The hegemony's narrative of human savagery crumbled in the face of a species that could have escaped Sol system if they had chosen self-preservation over principle. Instead, they had chosen to make their stand on their homeworld, defending not just their lives, but their right to exist as free beings. The battle lasted 17 minutes, Voss testified. When it ended, the hegemony fleet had been reduced to 11 ships, all of them too damaged to continue fighting. But humanity's victory came at a terrible price. The Prometheus array's activation had torn massive holes in Luna's structure, and the gravitational backlash was tearing the moon apart. Dr. Sanos knew the ray would be a one-time weapon. Voss continued, his voice heavy with the weight of sacrifice. The gravitational stress would destroy Luna base and everyone in it. She had calculated the odds of survival at 0%. The display showed the final moments of Luna base as the moon's surface cracked and heaved under impossible gravitational forces. Dr. Sanos and her team of 300 scientists and technicians remained at their posts, monitoring the array's performance until the very end. Their final transmission, Voss said quietly, was a complete technical analysis of the gravitational cascade effect. They broadcast it on all frequencies, ensuring that every species in the galaxy would understand exactly what humanity had accomplished. The transmission ended as Luna base collapsed into itself, taking with it the greatest scientific minds of the human species. But their sacrifice had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. A technologically inferior species had defeated a superior foe through sheer force of will and scientific innovation. The surviving hegemony ships retreated, Voss testified. Admiral Malvorth was dead, his fleet destroyed, his reputation shattered. The campaign that was supposed to end human resistance had instead ended the hegemony's credibility as an invincible force. Within hours of the battle's end, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Subject species that had endured hegemony oppression for centuries saw humanity's victory as proof that resistance was possible. Rebellions erupted on dozens of worlds, each one citing Earth's example as inspiration. The hegemony's empire began collapsing, the prosecutor noted, its crystalline voice carrying bitter acknowledgement. Your victory sparked the greatest period of galactic instability in recorded history. Our victory proved that freedom is worth any price. Voss replied, even extinction. The tribunal sat in stunned silence as the implications became clear. Humanity hadn't just won a battle, they had ignited a revolution that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. The prosecutor began loading the final set of files, its movements sharp with barely contained rage. The war was over, but the reckoning had only just begun. The courtroom fell silent as Admiral Voss prepared to deliver his final testimony. The holographic display showed her 3 years after the Battle of Luniscard, but unbroken, its people rebuilding from the ashes of the greatest war in galactic history. The hegemony's collapse was swift and complete. Voss began, his weathered face reflecting the weight of Pyrrhic victory. Within 6 months of Malvorth's defeat, their empire had fractured into competing factions. The species they had oppressed for centuries turned against them with a fury that surprised even us. The display showed worlds across the galaxy erupting in rebellion. The crystalline hive, enslaved for 8 centuries, had vaporized their hegemony overseers with industrial plasma cutters. The void runners, forced to serve as the hegemony's scouts, had turned their knowledge of hyperspace routes into a weapon, stranding entire fleets in empty space. Your example inspired them. The Trixon prosecutor accused, its voice carrying bitter acknowledgement. Your brutality became their template. Our desperation became their hope. Voss corrected, For the first time in galactic history, subject species learned that their oppressors could bleed. The tribunal reviewed the casualty reports with growing horror. The post-war rebellions had claimed over 3 billion lives across 47 star systems. The galaxy's carefully maintained peace had shattered, replaced by a chaos that would take decades to resolve. The hegemony's survivors approached us for peace negotiations. Voss continued. They wanted humanity to help restore order. And your response? The Valdorian counselor asked, its slug-like form glistening with nervous secretions. Voss allowed himself a cold smile. We told them that order was their problem. We were busy rebuilding our own civilization. The display shifted to show Earth's reconstruction efforts. The planet bore scars that would last for generations. Luna's destruction had created tidal disruptions that flooded coastal cities, while the gravitational echoes from the Prometheus array had destabilized satellite orbits across the system. But humanity endured. They rebuilt their cities, established new colonies, and most importantly, they remembered. Every human child learned the names of the heroes who had died to keep their species free. Dr. Sanos became a figure of legend, her sacrifice inspiring a new generation of scientists who pushed the boundaries of possibility. The charges against you, the prosecutor continued, stand regardless of the war's outcome. 17 counts of violations of interstellar warfare codes. How do you plead? Voss stood slowly, his movement carrying the dignity of a man who had faced extinction and emerged victorious. Guilty, he said simply, guilty of every charge. The admission sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The gallery erupted in whispers and gasps as the implications became clear. However, Voss continued, his voice cutting through the noise. I plead guilty under the laws of a galactic order that no longer exists. The hegemony's codes were written by conquerors for the convenience of conquest. They assumed that all species would accept their role as cattle. He turned to face the tribunal directly, his eyes burning with the conviction that had carried humanity through its darkest hour. You judge me by the standards of a civilization that offered my species extinction as the price of membership. You condemn me for refusing to kneel to powers that would have erased us from existence. His voice rose, carrying the authority of command that had never truly left him. I am guilty of choosing survival over submission. I am guilty of valuing human freedom over galactic order. I am guilty of believing that my species deserved to exist. The Trixan prosecutor's crystalline form shimmered with rage. Your crimes destabilized the entire galaxy. Billions died because of your actions. Billions died because the hegemony chose genocide over coexistence. Voss shot back. Billions died because your galactic order was built on oppression and maintained through fear. We didn't start this war, we finished it. The tribunal deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the Arcturian representative's beak clicked with formal precision as it delivered the verdict. Admiral Voss, you are found guilty of all charges. However, given the unique circumstances of the conflict and the current state of galactic politics, this tribunal lacks the authority to impose meaningful sanctions. The words hung in the air like an admission of defeat. The galactic order that had created these laws no longer existed. The hegemony's collapse had left a power vacuum that no single species could fill. Furthermore, the Arcturian continued, several member species have formally requested that humanity be granted full membership in the Galactic Unity Council. With Admiral Voss serving as Earth's representative, the irony was not lost on anyone present. The same species that had stood trial for war crimes was now being invited to help govern the galaxy. Voss's response was characteristically direct. Humanity accepts membership in the council, he said, but we serve as equal, not as subjects. We will contribute to galactic peace, but we will not sacrifice our sovereignty to maintain it. The prosecutor's final question carried the weight of a species trying to understand an enemy that had become an ally. Was it worth it, Admiral? The destruction, the death, the chaos, was human independence worth the price? Voss was quiet for a long moment, his thoughts turning to the billions who had died in humanity's war for survival. Dr. Sanos and her team on Luna Base, the volunteers who had stayed behind on New Pittsburgh, Captain Vasquez and her crew, sacrificing their minds to save their species. Ask me again in 100 years, he said finally, when the galaxy has had time to adapt to the idea that no species has the right to enslave another, when the children of every world grow up knowing that freedom is possible, even against impossible odds. He paused, his weathered face reflecting the cost of every decision that had brought them to this moment. But yes, he continued, his voice carrying the conviction, that has sustained humanity through its darkest hour. It was worth it. It will always be worth it. The tribunal adjourned, and Admiral HFY walked free not as a pardoned criminal, but as the representative of a species that had earned its place in the galaxy through blood, sacrifice, and an absolute refusal to accept extinction as the price of peace. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of the hegemony was over, replaced by something messier, more dangerous, but infinitely more free, and at the center of it all stood humanity, scarred, stubborn, and utterly unbroken. They had called him a war criminal. History would remember him as the man who taught the galaxy that freedom was worth any price, even survival itself. Earth called him commander. The galaxy would learn to call him liberator. The war was over. The real victory was just beginning.